They say that a father's love for his child is unconditional, that nothing in this world should be able to break the bond between them. But what happens when a father's love becomes a toxic force, warped by fear and obsession? What happens when the person you trust most turns out to be your greatest threat? This is the story of John Davis, a man whose perfect life and impeccable reputation hid a dark truth. A man whose darkest secret would drive him to commit the unthinkable. John Davis didn't just betray his son, he murdered him. This is a tale of lies, power, and a father willing to destroy everything to keep his secrets buried. John Davis was a man who had everything. He was a well-respected business owner, a pillar of the community, and a loving father to his 16-year-old son, Daniel. John's life seemed perfect, too perfect, perhaps. He ran a successful construction company, had a beautiful home, and was a member of the local country club. But behind closed doors, his life was anything but perfect. The cracks in John's life began to show when Daniel started behaving differently. Daniel had always been the model child, bright, ambitious, and kind. But recently, he had become withdrawn. He started spending more time in his room, his grades slipped, and he began to distance himself from his friends. His mother, Lisa, noticed the change but couldn't figure out what was wrong. John, on the other hand, didn't see it as a phase. He saw it as a problem that needed to be controlled. But Daniel wasn't the real problem. The problem was John's empire, the construction business that he had spent years building. Behind the facade of success, there were deep secrets, buried lies, and illegal deals. John had been skimming money from projects, bribing city officials, and even laundering money for organized crime syndicates. He knew that if these secrets were exposed, it would destroy everything: his company, his wealth, and most importantly, his reputation. Daniel had started asking questions that John couldn't afford to have answered. He had found documents in his father's office, documents that didn't add up, that pointed to something darker, something illegal. John tried to dismiss it at first, but deep down, he knew that Daniel's curiosity could be his downfall. His son was no longer just a bystander in this perfect life, he was a threat. And in John's world, threats had to be eliminated. The night of the murder was like any other. John had just returned from a business dinner, his mind heavy with the weight of his actions. The deal he had made earlier that day with a crime syndicate had been risky, too risky. But it was the only way to keep his business afloat. He needed the money, and he needed to make sure Daniel didn't uncover the truth. As he walked into the house, he heard the sound of Daniel's guitar coming from his room. It was the sound of his son, alive, breathing, and unknowingly standing in the way of everything John had worked for. John stood at the door for a moment, watching his son strum the guitar in the dim light. A pang of guilt hit him, but it quickly dissipated. He had made his choice. He would do whatever it took to keep his world intact. But tonight, Daniel would learn the truth, the price of knowing too much. It happened so quickly that no one could have predicted it. John entered Daniel's room, his face twisted with anger and fear. He confronted his son, demanding to know what he had found. Daniel, who had once admired his father, now looked at him with suspicion, his once beloved father now a stranger. The argument escalated quickly, and in that moment of rage and panic, John did the unthinkable. He grabbed a nearby belt and strangled his son, suffocating him until the life drained from his body. Daniel didn't fight back, not because he didn't care, but because he was too shocked to understand what was happening. The man he trusted most had just become his executioner. It was over in minutes, but the impact of that night would last forever. John sat in the darkness of Daniel's room, staring at the lifeless body of his son. His heart pounded in his chest, and for the first time in years, John realized the full weight of what he had done. He had killed his own flesh and blood, not just to protect his business, but to protect his own secrets. Daniel had been the only one who knew, and now he was gone. John's empire was safe, at least for now, but the guilt that began to gnaw at him was unbearable. The perfect life, the perfect facade, was now shattered. His world had crumbled, and there was no turning back. His son was dead, and John had killed him to keep his lies hidden. John quickly covered up the crime, staging the scene to look like a tragic accident. He placed the guitar in Daniel's hand as if it were a sign of his final moments. He called 911, pretending to be the distraught father who had just found his son unresponsive in his room. The authorities quickly arrived, but John's carefully crafted story held up. The police, seeing no signs of foul play, ruled Daniel's death as an unfortunate tragedy, a result of a drug overdose or a freak accident. John was devastated, and the community rallied around him in support. But something was wrong. The lies, the guilt, the fear, John could feel it closing in on him. And then there was Lisa, Daniel's mother. She was grieving, but she was also questioning. Why had Daniel been so withdrawn in the weeks leading up to his death? Why had he seemed so distant, so secretive? Lisa started digging into her son's life, finding traces of things he had hidden. His journal, his notes, everything pointed to the truth. Daniel had known. He had discovered his father's secrets. Lisa confronted John, her heart heavy with suspicion. She asked him about Daniel's death, about the strange things Daniel had said in his final days. John denied everything, his facade of the grieving father never wavering. But deep down, he knew Lisa was getting closer to the truth. She wasn't just mourning the loss of her son, she was hunting for answers. The more she dug, the more she realized that Daniel's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a cover-up. Lisa began to uncover things, financial records, secret meetings, and whispered conversations that painted a dark picture of her husband's life. John had been laundering money, making deals with dangerous people, and using his position of power to manipulate everyone around him. Daniel had known too much, and John had killed him to protect everything he had built. Lisa's world was crumbling as the truth became too much to ignore. She had lost her son, and now she was losing her husband. The man she had loved for so long, the man who had seemed perfect in every way, was a murderer, a liar, a criminal. And now, she had to decide what to do with the knowledge she had uncovered. John's perfect life was unraveling. The pressure was mounting. But there was one final thing he hadn't accounted for: his son's secret messages. As the investigation continued, Lisa found a letter hidden in Daniel's room. It was written by Daniel to someone who had been helping him gather evidence against his father. The letter spoke of a plan to expose John's crimes, and it hinted at a betrayal that John could never have imagined. As Lisa read the letter, her heart sank. Daniel had known all along, and now, the truth about her husband's dark empire was coming to light. The question was, could she bring herself to confront him? Could she live with the knowledge that her husband had killed their son to protect his secrets? But just as Lisa began to piece together the full picture, she received an anonymous message, a warning from someone who knew more than they should. The message read, "Your husband isn't the only one with secrets. Your son wasn't the only one trying to expose the truth." What was this mysterious warning about? And who else knew the truth about John's dark past? John Davis had thought he had covered his tracks. After Daniel's death, he went to great lengths to maintain the illusion of a perfect, grieving father. The police had ruled it an accident, and everyone in town rallied behind him, offering their support. Lisa, Daniel's mother, was consumed with grief, but she was also filled with doubts. The more she mourned, the more she questioned the circumstances surrounding her son's death. It wasn't just the unanswered questions that plagued her. It was the sudden and drastic change in John's behavior. John had always been a pillar of the community, but in the weeks after Daniel's death, something shifted. He became colder, more withdrawn. He avoided family and friends, refusing to acknowledge the weight of his actions. Instead of finding comfort in his wife, he distanced himself further, retreating into his work and his hidden world of crime. But Lisa couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Lisa's suspicions grew when she found the letter in Daniel's room, a letter that Daniel had written to a mysterious person, someone who had been helping him uncover the truth about his father. The letter spoke of a plan to expose John's criminal activities and hinted at a betrayal from someone close to John. The revelation rocked Lisa to her core. Was John's business dealing with more than just construction contracts? Was there a deeper connection to the criminal underworld that she had never known? Lisa's world shattered, not just because she had lost her son, but because she realized that her husband, the man she had loved and built a life with, had lied to her for years. She had been blinded by his charm, his success, and his ability to maintain a perfect public image. But now, the cracks in that facade were beginning to show. She had to know the truth. She couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. Late one night, Lisa decided to confront John. She found him alone in his office, reviewing business papers as usual, but something about the way he avoided her gaze made her heart race. The man who had once been the center of her world was now a stranger. She could see the guilt in his eyes, but he didn't speak a word. Lisa pushed him harder, asking about the letter she had found and about Daniel's suspicions. She demanded answers. For a moment, there was silence. Then, John's voice broke the stillness. "You don't understand, Lisa. It was never about the business. It was about keeping everything we've built together safe. You don't know what they would have done if they found out." "Who, John? Who are you talking about?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling with fear and confusion. John's eyes hardened, and for the first time, Lisa saw the monster hidden beneath the surface. "I did what I had to do," he said coldly. "Daniel was a threat. He knew too much. He couldn't be allowed to expose us. To expose me." John's confession hit Lisa like a blow to the chest. The truth was out now, but it was worse than she had ever imagined. Her own husband, whom she had trusted with her life, had killed their son to protect his criminal empire. Lisa was paralyzed with shock, her mind unable to process the enormity of what John had just admitted. But her shock didn't last long. As the reality set in, something inside her snapped. She couldn't live with this man anymore. She couldn't let him walk free after what he had done. John, however, was calculating. He realized that his confession to Lisa had only added fuel to the fire. She now knew everything: his dealings, his lies, and his darkest secret. John couldn't afford to lose control now. He had already taken one life to protect himself. He wasn't about to let his wife turn him in. As Lisa tried to process the weight of what she had just learned, she began to see John in a new light. The man she had loved was no longer the man she thought she knew. He was a monster, a man driven by obsession, fear, and power. Lisa knew she had to escape, but she also knew that John wouldn't let her go so easily. The thought of her exposing him to the authorities made him panic. He began to make plans to silence her, just as he had silenced Daniel. John knew that Lisa was the only person who could bring him down now. She had the knowledge, the power to destroy everything he had worked for. And John Davis wasn't going to let that happen. Lisa knew she couldn't trust her husband. She started making secret plans of her own, reaching out to the people who had helped Daniel in his investigation, his friends, his schoolmates, even a former employee of John's who had been working for the company before he left in disgust at the shady dealings he had witnessed. These people, who had once been too scared to speak out, now had a voice. Lisa was determined to make sure they had the evidence they needed to bring John to justice. But just as Lisa began to make her move, John's paranoia grew. He started keeping a closer eye on her, making sure she didn't slip away. He was always present, always watching, always controlling. Every time Lisa thought she was one step ahead, John seemed to catch up. His grip on her life was suffocating. In one last desperate attempt to keep his secrets hidden, John made the decision to eliminate Lisa as well. One night, as she sat at the kitchen table, she heard the unmistakable sound of John's footsteps behind her. She turned just in time to see him raise a heavy object over his head, an object he had used many times before to fix things around the house. A feeling of dread filled Lisa's chest. She knew what was coming, but before he could strike, Lisa did something John didn't expect. She fought back. The fight was brutal, and Lisa barely managed to escape with her life. She ran from the house, her heart racing as she realized that the man she had loved for years was willing to kill her to protect his own lies. Lisa was on the run. She had barely escaped John's violent attack that night. Her heart raced as she sought refuge with those who had once been too scared to speak up against John. Her mind was frantic, piecing together everything Daniel had discovered before his death. She reached out to Daniel's closest friend, James, and a former employee of John's, who had quit after witnessing too many questionable deals. Together, they formed a plan to expose John's dark empire once and for all. But John, still under the illusion that he could control everything, was not far behind. His obsession with keeping his perfect life intact had become a driving force that overshadowed everything else. He couldn't let Lisa speak out, couldn't let her bring him down. The thought of losing everything he had built was unbearable. The lies, the manipulation, the killings, everything he had done had been for one goal: power. And now, power was slipping through his fingers. Lisa knew that the only way to bring John down was to expose his crimes for everyone to see. She had gathered the evidence, but would it be enough to put him behind bars? She couldn't trust the authorities. John had too many connections. She had to do this herself. With the help of James and others who had witnessed John's deceit, Lisa began to formulate a plan to deliver the final blow to John's criminal empire. She knew it wouldn't be easy. John's power extended far beyond the walls of their home. But the more she learned, the more she realized that his life wasn't just about the money. It was about control. He had manipulated everyone around him, including her. And now, it was time for the truth to come to light. But just as Lisa thought she had everything in place, the unthinkable happened. She was cornered. John, with his chilling, calculating mind, had discovered her plan. He had tracked her every move, watching her like a hawk. He had known she was getting too close to the truth, and now, he would do whatever it took to silence her once and for all. The night was silent as Lisa sat in the safety of a friend's house, preparing to send the evidence to the authorities. She thought she was finally free from John's grasp. But then the doorbell rang, and she froze. "Lisa, I know what you've been doing." John's voice came through the door, cold and menacing. "You're making a huge mistake. You think you can destroy everything I've built? You don't know who you're dealing with." John had come for her. He wasn't just a father protecting his empire anymore. He had become a predator, willing to do anything to survive. The facade of the loving father was gone. In its place was a man who would kill again to protect his secret. Lisa's breath quickened. She knew she had no time to waste. She grabbed her phone and sent the evidence to the local news station, hoping that even if she didn't make it out alive, the truth would be exposed. She backed away from the door, knowing that John would find a way inside. Her only hope was that someone would get the message before it was too late. As the door creaked open, Lisa's heart stopped. John stood there, his face twisted in anger, his eyes burning with hatred. He was not the man she had once loved. He was a monster, someone who had thrown away everything for the sake of power. "You should have never crossed me, Lisa," John sneered, stepping into the room. "You think you're the first to try and destroy me? You won't be the last, but you will be the first to fail." Lisa backed into the corner of the room, but she stood her ground. She was no longer the wife who had blindly supported her husband. She was a woman who had seen the darkness and was prepared to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. The confrontation was swift. John lunged at Lisa, but this time, she was ready. She had fought back before, and she wasn't going to stop now. With every ounce of strength, Lisa pushed him away, grabbing the closest object she could find, a lamp. She swung it at him, knocking him off balance just long enough to make a run for the door. But John wasn't far behind. He was relentless. As they fought, the noise of their struggle echoed through the house. Lisa knew she couldn't keep this up forever. She had to escape, had to make it to safety. Just as John reached out to grab her, a loud crash echoed from the front door. Police sirens screamed in the distance. John's expression shifted from fury to panic. He had no plan for this. The evidence Lisa had sent was already in the hands of the news station, and now the authorities were on their way. Lisa had done it. She had exposed him. John froze, his eyes darting around the room, calculating his next move. Lisa, panting and terrified, knew she couldn't let him get away. But before she could take another step, John lunged for the door. In a final, desperate attempt to protect himself, he made one last move that would shock everyone. The door crashed open, and the police poured in, just as Lisa heard the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Her heart stopped. Was John really going to kill her, even now? Or had justice finally caught up with him? The gunshot echoed through the room, and everything went silent. What happens next? Will John finally face the consequences of his actions, or will he escape justice one last time? And what does Lisa's future hold, knowing that she was the one to expose the monster she had once called her husband? Write in the comment section what you think should happen next. If you found this story gripping and terrifying, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime exposés. The truth is always darker than you think.